You live to the limits you accept for yourself. There's nothing really to argue about that. Limited views create limited lifestyles. And you could be a limited millionaire because there's limitations to life in general that span the spectrum. It's not just financial, it's not just material, it's not necessarily superficial. There's also limits to who you are physically, spiritually, emotionally, relationally, and all of that in its entirety, in its wholeness, makes you your unified you. And what you see or don't see, what you have or don't have, who you are or who you aren't, is strictly based off the limits you accept for yourself. And if you can't agree, align, and appreciate that statement, then I'd argue you're not in control of your life. But let's use this as a way to logically put it in perspective, to allow us to use it to possibly expand our limits. So if we can agree to the premise of you live to your limits, and the limits, you set them. And if you want to expand your life, you got to extend your limits. But that comes with a lot of pain. And typically that pain leads us into a very, very crowded space with people who are complaining. Because pain done correctly will absolutely allow you to expand your limits. In fact, anything you do that makes you better is painful. Reading to expand your knowledge and extend your limits, painful. Doing some cardio to work on your heart and make your health better, painful. Expand your limit, expand your life, expand your health. Lifting weights, painful. Expands your body. The grind, the grit, putting in the work. We're all doing it anyway, but from a limited perspective. So let's continue along those lines. That where you are and what you have is exactly what you need to survive. And if you can't break it, you've accepted it and have limited yourself. Some analogies. We can all go to a really, 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 really tall building. And if life was a really tall building, taller than the Empire State, we can all get in the same elevator. But the rules to the elevator are, it's only going to go up one floor at a time. You can't just press the top floor and get there without going through each floor. And your ability to climb the floors is your ability to take what the limit is for each floor, execute it, dominate it, and then become tired of it. Not use your pain to complain, but use your pain to grow to the next floor. I faced a very similar situation about 6 years ago. And it coincides with me moving out of New York. And my evolution, the first incentive, because we need to be incentivized for fear, for me was how I was raised and where I grew up, which was in the projects in the South Bronx. And I won't get into detail there as far as the struggles, the difficulties, and what that implies, because I do have a lot of respect for it. It's just a matter of, if you grew up with that poverty-driven mindset, if you grew up in a project environment like me, like I can go back and there's still people sitting on the same bench doing the same things. I'm not judging. I'm not critiquing. I have no opinion other than if you don't want to sit on that bench, you got to do the work to get off the bench. And so about 6 years ago, my wife and I decided, we should really move out of New York. And the impetus for it was we were living in a 2-bedroom apartment, about 600 to 700 square feet. Me, my wife, my daughter, my son, and my mother-in-law. So if you look at it from this perspective, there was nothing technically wrong. Bills were being paid. The kids were in private school. Food was on the table. We had heat. We had AC, running water. We lived in a really good environment. Wasn't really poverty-driven mindset. Middle class people doing middle class things on their 9 to 5 grind, successful to the limit that that environment allowed. Now, I could have stayed there. And truthfully, there was enough love, affection, and nurturing to allow our relationships to grow. But that's difficult because you put 5 people in a 600 to 700 square foot apartment and you start to see grandma sleeping in the same room as the grandkids. There's a beauty to that. And that again is very close. But the limit is we all eventually gonna need some privacy. We all eventually gonna need to, especially my wife and I, in order to maintain a healthy intimacy. Like we can't be sharing walls with grandma, mother-in-law, and the 2 kids. So what happens? There's stress, there's overwhelm, there's arguing that occurs because it's not all peachy. It never is all peachy. It's not intended to be peachy. You wouldn't know hate without love. You wouldn't know happy without sad, light without dark. So you need to appreciate the dualities in life. But now the limits you accept come down to, I'm in this situation. Am I going to continue to be limited by it? Pull away, let the fear suppress me, bring me down, and restrict me to this limit? Or am I going to use it as incentive to expand out the same way I did when I left the projects all those years ago? And it doesn't come without difficulties. I think that's some of the things we have to express and explain and appreciate. That, of course, I could just say, yo, I need to get out. We need 4 bedrooms. We need 3 bathrooms. We need a backyard. All these things you need. You're expanding your limits. But the reality is, I can think of, feel, and want that a lot sooner than I can actually grab it because there's a process. And the limits that I'm able to expand are going to come down to where am I at financially? What can I afford? And where can I go that'll change my environment and give me this lifestyle? So naturally, I go and I'm like, I think we should buy a house, right? Okay. What's the process for buying a house? At that time, I didn't have the credit score. At that time, I didn't have a down payment. At that time, my kids were in the middle of a school year. So all these things start to hit you. All these things and the reality of your current limits start to become a big mind fuck. And that creates pain, which then either forces you to complain or hopefully, as I did thankfully, take some action. So if we're back in the elevator, I got to get to the next floor. Credit score is not good enough. I got to work on my credit score. Don't have a down payment. I got to see where I could pull money, save some money. I don't know where I'm going to go. I got to research an environment that is conducive to growth for my family. I'm not going back to the projects. That's not where I'm going, right? My kids are in private school, like I said, at this time. Great environment. I need some things that match. And so the process of raising credit scores, finding the environment, applying, being approved, finding a house, all those things, it all sounds well and good. And it's all attainable. It's nothing that you can't do. But you got to enter the elevator 1 floor at a time. And the truth and the reality to what stops you from expanding your limits is that you're restricted, usually emotionally. Because there's a lot of things that you know you want, but the pain to get it is immense, intense, and it can be paralyzing. So what do? You live to the limits that you place on yourself. And the minute you expand your limits by changing what you see, you can possibly change what you see. The philosophy goes, as within, so without, as above, so below, as the universe, so the soul. The life you seek for yourself is a matter of you appreciating, understanding, looking around, and knowing that it's just merely a box. And I'm not saying that you're going to break free of the box. What I'm saying is build a bigger box. Don't stay in a restricted box, particularly if you know you're feeling restricted. And it starts with your ability to become more aware and mindful of where you really are in your limits. What is limiting you financially? There isn't anyone who has the skills to make six figures that isn't making six figures unless they don't have the experience. There isn't anyone who is in shape that hasn't put themselves through the workout to get themselves in shape. There isn't anyone who has a healthy relationship with their significant other, their children, mother-in-laws, that hasn't put the work in to stretch the boundaries and the limits of where they are. And so the message for you to expand, to get and absolutely be able to build a life that's more acceptable to you is to slowly expand where you are limited. And the limitations that we see are always going to be socially, because the environment we create reinforces who we think we are. You're going to have to cut some people off. That hurts, but you can do it. Because ultimately, here's what happens. When you cut off the bums, I hate to say it like that, but a little bit of effect there. You go dark for a little bit. Eventually, you come back to the light to create a new circle of people who are more aligned with your limits. That's all we do. We continually, as social, habitual, routine creatures, need to be reinforced by everything we see based on everything we see. So when we change how we feel, what we want, and what we believe in, our limits should be here, then we change the limits and everything that we see out here. It just requires a little bit of discipline. It requires you going back to the fundamentals, back to the basics, and know that wherever you are today, you chose to get there because you needed to break a limit that was previously on you. You rose to a different floor. Your problem is you stood on that floor. If you want to go up in the elevator, you got to go up in the elevator. Focus on your mindset. Focus on your skills. Focus on your body. Focus on your relationships. Focus on your environment. Focus on the culture that you create for yourself. Expand all these limits, and everything around you has no choice but to expand. It's all logic and math. Change your mind, change your life. I am who I say I am. Stay rich.